If you're not religious, like me, how do you explain the transformational power that certain places have? They bring an incredible degree of attention to where you are and the passage of time. You're looking at every flower twitching, wondering if it's just the breeze or some magical pulse. The CGI landscape is another world. It has its own physical laws. It can defy gravity. But surely the wonder of cinematic space is that it is wedded to reality? We are moving beyond the non-fiction novel to different kinds of narrative art, different forms of cognition. Loaded with moral and political point, narrative has been recalibrated to record, honor, and protest the latest historically specific instance of futility and mess. I think that if you are a resolute, unswerving atheist, you have that sense that you are conscious of the God-shaped hole that has been left in the wake of any religious belief, and in a way, one is much more drawn to articulate why it is that certain places, or certain experiences, have a kind of power. You read Stalingrad by Antony Beevor because you're interested in the Second World War or Russia or whatever. Once you've published a few books, you drag around this ball and chain of a backlist. All the evidence of how few you've sold is there. I think a lot of writers my age have this strange experience of going from would-be to has-been. I think I do have a sort of terrible propensity for boredom and for being bored, even though I am absolutely of the opinion that one shouldn't be bored and that there is no excuse for it and that it is a personal failing. One of the great privileges of my life was growing up in a house without books. In terms of target audience, who cares what a middle-aged guy like me wants? Most mainstream are not catering to me at all. There's one profound difference between secular and religious pilgrimages. It's inconceivable that a Muslim would feel a sense of anticlimax when reaching Mecca. But for a secular pilgrim, the potential for disappointment is always there. I think I got into traveling because it was so not in my blood, so against my tendency to just stay put because my dad just hated going on holidays, because, as I've said in many essays, the thing that he hated more than anything else in life was spending money. And as soon as you leave your home, you're spending money. Writers are not obliged to deal with current events, but it happens that the big story of our times, the Al-Qaeda attacks on New York and the Pentagon, and the subsequent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, is being told in some of the greatest books of our time. Have you ever stayed at the Four Seasons Hotel in Mumbai? I'd warmly recommend it. It's super luxurious, and right next door, there's a classic slum, so you can do a quick slum tour and get back to your sanctuary without any inconvenience but with some excellent snaps. Contrary to popular belief, Oxford has the highest concentration of dull-witted, stupid, narrow-minded people anywhere in the British Isles. In history books, or the one about the guy who cut his hand off to get out of a canyon in Utah, you really want them to be accurate. But my stuff is such small beer by comparison. It really doesn't matter if it happened exactly how I say it happened. I didn't get on a plane until I was 23, after I left Oxford and was teaching at Lucy Clayton Secretarial College in London. The lesson of travel seems to be so banal, but so great, which is that people are just so amazingly decent the world over. Given the disparity of income and wealth, it's amazing not just that you don't get robbed everywhere, it's amazing you don't get eaten. People never read my books for the quality of the documentary value. I could never write a book where the point of view character was a short person, because I just can't imagine what that's like. I do understand my limitations as a fiction writer, which is why my novels are always going to be close to home. When I started writing, the deal was that publishers gave you $1,000 or $2,000 as an advance to buy some sweets, with the promise that they would make a big push with your fourth book when you'd built up a bit of a following. But by the time my fourth book came out, previously unpublished authors were the new big thing. If you just take me as a fiction writer, then you're probably going to find me fairly limited. I don't read genre fiction if that means novels with lots of killing and shooting. Even Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men seemed pretty childish in that regard. I am still moved by passages of Marx, the Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of Right, for example, where, after the famous line about religion being the opium of the people, he goes on to call it the heart of a heartless world. I didn't read much of anything till I was 15, except Alistair MacLean and Michael Moorcock, the sword and sorcery novels, when I was about 13 or 14. I'm as strong and supple as a pane of thin glass. I've got too many ailments, left shoulder, left elbow and left wrist, in fact, the whole of the left arm. I'm incredibly competitive in all sports in a way that is so mystifying to my wife because she grew up playing the violin and piano. I've always been like that. I really like to win at sport. I'm never happier when writing than when I see gags taking shape, ideally, gags at my own expense. What I like is the shuttling back and forth, serious into comedy and vice versa, ideally, both in the same sentence, or even simultaneously. The best jokes are always ideas in miniature. I have this long-running idea that the distinction between fiction and non-fiction is not just, did it happen or didn't it happen, it's one of form. I feel that form determines how readers read a book and how they judge it. I remember being interviewed about my first novel, The Color of Memory. They kept using the expression, your first novel, and I said, no, I object to that phrase, because this is it for me. While writing, I'm always so happy in the middle of a book or finishing a book and really hate starting them, so I often think, I wish I had a really big book to write to which I could devote 7 years of my life. It doesn't require much thought for one to realize that any travel book worthy of the name has to be a departure from the standard idea of the form. I first got a sense of that idea of nodality, but I didn't use the word back then, with The Missing of the Psalm, that sense of a particular place in a landscape or on a map having some kind of tremendous power to draw us to itself, that made me conscious, and since then, really, it has been an abiding concern of mine. The devastating scale and frequency of my disappointment was proof of how much I still expected and wanted from the world, of what high hopes I still had for it. Stories don't interest me. It would be nice to turn off that incessant churning of consciousness. I think I can recognize when a piece is at a state of completion. I've never been much drawn toward satire of any kind. Earnest people are always a bit on the thick side in my experience. Writing, for me, has always been a way of not having a career. What I've really liked doing is combining what you might call art criticism or music criticism with something that is happening in real life. It's funny, because people always say when they meet me, having read me, or they read me, having met me, that they are struck by how the tone is pretty similar, in real life and in the books. Generally, I'm not anti the novel. My reading of serious books about serious music is seriously compromised by the way that I can't understand any musical theory. Any mentions of D major or C minor are meaningless to me. I've always had this belief that you want to write about universal truths. One of the things I've really come to realize is that the chances of arriving at a universal truth are increased if you remain absolutely faithful to the contingencies of your own experience and the vagaries of your own nature. When I'm writing, quite often I start having a good time when I see there's a chance to make myself look like a real jerk. I start chuckling and having an interesting, rather than a boring, time. Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.